And I don't think it should be lost on anyone that just yesterday it came out. You know how many the Trump administration pushed into our interior in the last full month? 0. And I want you to compare that to a month of the Biden administration where hundreds of thousands of people, barely vetted, if vetted, were forced into our nation's interior. And you've seen these consequences play out. It's not just rape victims, murder victims, robbery victims. We've caught people here that's from foreign nations that are on the terrorist watch list that can cause some of our nation's biggest tragedies and devastation. That is the undermining of what a commander-in-chief is supposed to do in those policies. We saw it day one, and that's just one example. And it played out for 4 years. So I think one of the reasons that you see not one Democrat in this hearing room right now asking these questions is because how do you defend the indefensible? When sheriffs were calling and pleading with us to take these people from their jails and not make them release them back into the communities, we would try and communicate this, but indeed they were canceling detainers and releasing these people into the communities. They were taking people that were brought here from other countries, brought here only to prosecute because they were a danger to our nation and our people. And instead of deporting them after their prison sentences, they were pushing them into the United States.
Hello, Patriots. Welcome back to Signal 76, your beacon of truth in these turbulent times. Today, we're diving deep into what might be the most damning congressional testimony exposing the absolute catastrophic failures of the Biden administration's immigration policies and the deliberate endangerment of American citizens. What you're about to hear will shock you, anger you, and hopefully motivate you to take action before it's too late. Before we get into this explosive content, I need you to hit that subscribe button right now and ring that notification bell, because YouTube is actively suppressing conservative voices like ours. We're fighting an uphill battle against big tech censorship, and your subscription is our lifeline. Like this video, share it with every patriot you know, and stick around until the very end, because I'm going to reveal something that the mainstream media absolutely does not want you to know about what's really happening at our southern border.
Senator Schmidt, appreciate you holding this important hearing. And certainly I appreciated my colleague Senator Britt's remarks in listing out so many of the failures of the last administration as they played out. I think Americans, yes, sat horrified as they watched these events unfold, but at the core of those failures were bad policy decisions. And the truth is, you know, people talk a lot about the end of the Biden administration and his debate performance. But those of us that were involved of the repercussion and the consequences of some really bad, irresponsible, reckless, I would say dangerous policies, and were involved from day one of the Biden administration, we started questioning immediately who was making these decisions, because they were so disastrous for the security of this nation and the safety of our people. So I would say from day one of the presidency through all 4 years, this was a legitimate question, and every single failure that Senator Britt listed was the consequence of a policy decision. When I was the Florida Attorney General, one of the very first executive actions that came out undid both Republican and Democrat presidential precedents of saying, if someone is here in our country and they're here illegally and they are committing serious felonies, we are deporting them. And actual priorities were that those were the ones they went after first. And one of the very first actions that came out of that White House was they abandoned that both Democrats and Republican presidents had enforced, and released to all law enforcement around the nation that they were no longer going to make that a priority. When sheriffs were calling and pleading with us to take these people from their jails and not make them release them back into the communities, we would try and communicate this, but indeed they were canceling detainers and releasing these people into the communities. They were taking people that were brought here from other countries, brought here only to prosecute because they were a danger to our nation and our people. And instead of deporting them after their prison sentences, They were pushing them into the United States. And I don't think it should be lost on anyone that just yesterday it came out. You know how many the Trump administration pushed into our interior in the last full month? 0. And I want you to compare that to a month of the Biden administration where hundreds of thousands of people, barely vetted, if vetted, were forced into our nation's interior. And you've seen these consequences play out. It's not just rape victims, murder victims, robbery victims. We've caught people here that's from foreign nations that are on the terrorist watch list that can cause some of our nation's biggest tragedies and devastation. That is the undermining of what a commander-in-chief is supposed to do in those policies. We saw it day one, and that's just one example. And it played out for 4 years. So I think one of the reasons that you see not one Democrat in this hearing room right now asking these questions is because how do you defend the indefensible? What are they going to say? I mean, there has never been a more reckless, negligent administration that I can remember in my lifetime. And as an attorney general, as the wife of a law enforcement officer, as a federal prosecutor, as a judge, I sat horrified that that was the person that was in charge of our safety, our commander-in-chief, in charge of our borders. And I know, Mr. Wold, you have talked about the danger in executive actions being pushed out when somebody's not in charge that understands how it's affecting the safety of this nation. I'm sure based on your prior experience and some of the things that you saw being pushed out, I often thought, this is a radical aide's dream. You have a commander-in-chief probably not able to pay attention, and they're pushing out policies left and right. Tell me in your experience if you noticed anything where that could be the case coming out of that administration.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I mean, I think on the immigration score itself, so many of those sort of special powers exercised by President Biden on parole, on temporary protected status, they require the president to do those in his own name, correct? It's a case-by-case evaluation performed by the chief executive. And so I think in reviewing some of those, when I was sitting on the sidelines, the question I had was, what does the paper process look like for that? How did DHS work that up? How did it go through the staff secretary's office? And what was the president briefed on as far as the policy considerations tied to some of these decisions to bring in violent criminals from Haiti or Nicaragua into the interior of the United States?
And it concern you when you learned, and we are now uncovering, that cabinet officials were kept from meeting with the president for months at a time?
Look, I mean, if you go back through our history, Senator, so Grover Cleveland, Wilson, FDR, JFK, President Johnson, President Biden, it's almost a Democrat sport to keep from the American people the health and acuity of the chief executive. They've been doing this for a long time, but this is of another level, especially as Mr. Spicer was mentioning, the complicity of the national media in obscuring this, but also that cabinet officers would go to the lengths of avoiding interacting with the chief executive because they were fearful that they would have to speak to his diminished capacity.
And I'm running out of time, and it was of particular concern that the media seemed to never ask him about executive actions and policy. Favorite flavor of ice cream? Yes. Why he was pushing dangerous criminals into the interior of this nation? No. And that is why I think this hearing was so very important. What was coming out of this administration was a radical wish list. And certainly you can see it, what has happened and the consequences playing out right now. And now I think we're all seeing why.
Thank you. Senator Blackburn.
What we witnessed in this congressional hearing is nothing short of a confession of treason against the American people. We heard testimony that should send chills down the spine of every red-blooded American who still believes in the rule of law, national sovereignty, and the basic principle that a government's first duty is to protect its citizens. Instead, what we got was 4 years of deliberate sabotage, intentional chaos, and policies so reckless that they can only be described as an act of war against the American people. Let's start with the most damning revelation from this testimony. For decades, both Republican and Democrat administrations understood one fundamental principle when it came to immigration enforcement. If you're in this country illegally and you commit serious felonies, you get deported. Period. This wasn't controversial. This wasn't partisan politics. This was common sense governance that protected American communities from dangerous criminals who had no right to be here in the first place. But on day one of the Biden administration, they didn't just change this policy, they completely obliterated it. They sent a message to law enforcement agencies across the nation that dangerous foreign criminals were no longer a priority for deportation. Think about what this means, patriots. They took a policy that kept American families safe and threw it in the garbage because it didn't align with their radical open borders agenda. The testimony reveals something even more sinister. Local sheriffs were literally calling and pleading with federal authorities to take these dangerous criminals from their jails. These were law enforcement officers on the ground, dealing with the reality of violent foreign nationals in their custody, begging the federal government to do its job and remove these threats from American communities. But instead of listening to these heroic sheriffs, the Biden administration was actively canceling detainers and forcing these criminals back into our neighborhoods. This isn't incompetence, patriots. This is deliberate. This is a calculated decision to prioritize the comfort of foreign criminals over the safety of American citizens. When you have sheriffs pleading with you not to release dangerous criminals into their communities, and you ignore those pleas, you are choosing to endanger American lives for political purposes. But it gets worse. The testimony reveals that the Biden administration was taking people who had been brought to the United States specifically for prosecution because they were deemed too dangerous for their home countries. These weren't just random border crossers. These were individuals so dangerous that foreign governments wanted them prosecuted in American courts. And instead of deporting them after they served their sentences, the Biden administration was pushing them into American communities. Let that sink in for a moment. Foreign governments were essentially saying these people are too dangerous for our countries, so we're sending them to America for prosecution. And after American taxpayers paid to prosecute and incarcerate these individuals, instead of sending them back where they came from, the Biden administration was releasing them into American neighborhoods. This is beyond criminal negligence. This is a betrayal of the American people so profound that it defies comprehension. The numbers don't lie, and they paint a picture of deliberate destruction that should terrify every American. In the final 4 months of the Trump administration, exactly 0 individuals were pushed into America's interior without proper vetting. 0. That's what competent America First governance looks like. That's what happens when you have a president who actually cares about American safety and security. Compare that to just 1 month under the Biden administration, where hundreds of thousands of people, barely vetted if vetted at all, were forced into our nation's interior. Hundreds of thousands in a single month, compared to 0 in 4 months under Trump. This isn't just a policy difference, patriots. This is the difference between a president who puts America first and an administration that views American citizens as expendable in pursuit of their radical transformation agenda. The consequences of these policies aren't theoretical. They're playing out in real time in communities across America. We're talking about rape victims, murder victims, robbery victims, all because the Biden administration decided that foreign criminals deserved more consideration than American safety. These aren't statistics on a spreadsheet. These are real Americans whose lives have been destroyed by policies that should never have been implemented by any administration that claims to serve the American people. Even more terrifying, the testimony reveals that we've caught individuals from foreign nations who are on the terrorist watch list. Think about what this means. We have people in our country right now who are known to be potential terrorists, and they're here because the Biden administration abandoned the basic principle of vetting people before allowing them into our communities. These are individuals who have the capability to cause some of our nation's biggest tragedies and devastation, and they're walking free in American communities because Joe Biden and his handlers decided that border security was less important than virtue, signaling to their radical base. This brings us to perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this entire testimony. The witness suggests that many of these catastrophic policy decisions were being made by radical aides while the president himself was either unable or unwilling to understand the consequences of what was being implemented in his name. We're talking about executive actions that affect the safety and security of every American being pushed out by unelected bureaucrats while the supposed commander-in-chief was somewhere else entirely. The testimony reveals something that many of us suspected but couldn't prove. Cabinet officials were being kept from meeting with the president for months at a time. When they did interact with him, they were reportedly fearful about having to confront his diminished capacity. This isn't just about age or mental acuity, patriots. This is about the fact that life and death decisions affecting American security were being made by people who were never elected by the American people, while the person who was supposed to be in charge was effectively absent from the process. The historical context provided in this testimony is particularly damning. The witness points out that keeping the American people in the dark about a president's mental capacity has been a Democrat tradition going back to Grover Cleveland, Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, and Lyndon Johnson. But what happened with Biden represents a new level of deception because of the active complicity of the national media in covering up his obvious cognitive decline. Think about what this means for our constitutional republic. We had a situation where the person elected to serve as commander-in-chief was apparently not capable of understanding the implications of the policies being implemented in his name, and instead of informing the American people, the media was asking him about his favorite flavor of ice cream, while ignoring the fact that his administration was releasing dangerous criminals into American communities. This media complicity isn't just journalistic malpractice. It's an active participation in the endangerment of American lives. While they should have been asking hard questions about why known terrorists were being allowed into the country, they were focused on fluff pieces designed to make Biden appear competent and engaged. This is what happens when the media becomes an arm of a political party instead of serving as a watchdog for the American people. The testimony makes it clear that what was coming out of the Biden administration wasn't just bad policy. It was a radical wish list being implemented by unelected bureaucrats while the supposed president was either unaware or incapable of understanding what was happening. This explains why so many of the decisions seemed divorced from reality and why they caused such immediate and obvious harm to American communities. The fact that not a single Democrat senator was present during this hearing tells you everything you need to know about their priorities. They can't defend these policies because they're indefensible. They can't explain why American families should be endangered to accommodate foreign criminals because there is no explanation that makes sense to rational people. So instead of facing the music, they simply refuse to show up and hope that the American people won't notice. But we are noticing patriots. We're paying attention to every betrayal, every lie, every policy decision that puts America last. We're documenting the failures, the casualties, and the deliberate destruction of everything that made America the greatest nation in human history. And we're not going to let the memory hole this catastrophe just because they've moved on to their next destructive agenda. The implications of this testimony extend far beyond immigration policy. This is about the fundamental question of whether we still have a functioning constitutional republic or whether we've allowed unelected bureaucrats to seize control of the mechanisms of government, while keeping the American people in the dark about who's really making the decisions. This is why the 2024 election was so crucial and why President Trump's return to office represents hope for restoring sanity to American governance. We can't allow another 4 years of radical policies being implemented by shadow figures while the supposed president is kept away from the decision-making process. We need leadership that puts America first, that prioritizes American safety over foreign comfort, and that believes in the basic principle that a government's first duty is to protect its own citizens. The damage done by the Biden administration's immigration policies will take years to undo. The criminals who were released into American communities are still out there. The terrorists who were allowed to enter are still among us. The precedent of ignoring local law enforcement and prioritizing foreign criminals over American safety has been established and will be difficult to reverse. But we must reverse it. We must restore the principle that America comes first in American policy. We must return to the common sense understanding that people who enter our country illegally and commit serious crimes forfeit any right to remain in our communities. We must rebuild the trust between federal authorities and local law enforcement that was systematically destroyed over the past 4 years. This testimony should serve as a wake-up call to every American who still believes in the rule of law. We cannot allow our government to be hijacked by radical ideologues who view American citizens as obstacles to their transformational agenda. We cannot accept a system where life and death decisions are made by unelected bureaucrats while the elected president is kept in the dark about what's being done in his name. The fight for America's future is not over. In fact, it's just beginning. The forces that gave us 4 years of deliberate destruction haven't gone away. They're regrouping, they're planning, and they're waiting for their next opportunity to finish what they started. We must remain vigilant, we must stay informed, and we must never allow them to gaslight us into believing that what we witnessed over the past 4 years was normal or acceptable. Every American who hears this testimony should be demanding answers. How many more criminals are walking free in our communities because of these policies? How many potential terrorists are still among us? How many American families will pay the price for decisions made by people who were never held accountable to the American voters? These are the questions that should be dominating our political discourse. These are the issues that should be front and center in every political campaign and every media interview. But instead, we'll probably get more questions about ice cream flavors and softball interviews designed to help politicians avoid accountability for their catastrophic failures. That's why channels like Signal 76 exist, patriots. We're here to ask the hard questions, to demand real answers, and to keep fighting for the truth even when the entire establishment is aligned against us. We're here to remind you that you're not crazy for expecting your government to prioritize your safety over the comfort of foreign criminals. You're not unreasonable for wanting your elected officials to actually be in charge of the policies being implemented in their names. The testimony we've examined today represents more than just a policy failure. It represents a fundamental betrayal of the social contract between the American government and the American people. When we elect leaders, we expect them to lead. When we give them the power to make decisions that affect our lives and safety, we expect them to exercise that power responsibly and in our best interests. What we got instead was 4 years of shadow governance, where unelected radicals implemented policies that deliberately endangered American communities while keeping the supposed commander-in-chief away from the decision-making process. This is not how a constitutional republic is supposed to function, and we cannot allow it to become the new normal. As we move forward, we must remember that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. We must continue to hold our leaders accountable, continue to demand transparency in government operations, and continue to fight for policies that put America first. The testimony we heard today is just the beginning of what I believe will be a much larger reckoning with the failures and betrayals of the past 4 years. Patriots, if this video has opened your eyes to the reality of what we've been facing, I need you to take action right now. Subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and make sure you're getting every update as we continue to expose the truth. Share this video with everyone you know, because the mainstream media will never tell this story the way it needs to be told. Like this video to help us beat the algorithm that's trying to suppress conservative voices, and leave a comment telling me what you think about this devastating testimony. The fight for America continues, and we need every patriot in this battle. Together, we can restore sanity to our government, security to our borders, and safety to our communities. But only if we stay informed, stay engaged, and never stop fighting for the principles that made America great. Thank you for watching Signal 76, and remember, the signal never stops transmitting the truth.